Back when Armenians first settled in Los Angeles, they were chasing the American dream. But by the early 2000s, some of their grandkids were living a much darker version of it. What began as a tight-knit group of immigrant teens just trying to survive the streets of East Hollywood eventually morphed into something far more dangerous: Armenian Power, later known as Armenian Power 13. These guys weren't just about street cred anymore. They were pulling off million-dollar scams, teaming up with the Mexican Mafia and linking up with international crime rings. But here's the wild part. The most brutal violence didn't always come from rival gangs. It came from inside their own circle. As the gang leveled up from a neighborhood crew to a full-blown criminal enterprise, loyalty got blurry. And when money, pride, and betrayal got thrown into the mix, things got bloody fast. This is the story of how a gang that once stood to protect its own ended up putting bullets in their brothers. Back in the 1940s, Armenians started pulling up in Los Angeles, looking for a better shot at life. They were fleeing real struggles back home: war, poverty, chaos, and ended up stacking deep in Hollywood. People even started calling it Little Armenia. The dream for a lot of them was to one day have a house in spots like Glendale where they could build a life with a little peace and quiet. But it wasn't all smooth. Fast forward to the early 80s, Armenian Power was born. This wasn't just some gang that popped up out of nowhere. It came from a real place. One of the main figures was Armen Petrosian, better known in the streets as Silent. He wasn't born in LA. He showed up at 15 straight from Armenia and dropped into East Hollywood right in the middle of gangland. The streets were already carved up. Black, Latino, and Asian crews had their turf, their codes, their numbers. Armenians were new, small, and easy targets. So what happens when you have a crew of young immigrants getting pressed daily? They regroup. Silent and a few of his boys from East Hollywood and Glendale decided to build their own thing. Not to make noise at first, but just to hold it down. That's how Armenian Power started. First, it was just a circle of homies watching each other's backs, but the streets got them moving different, and that little circle started growing. Silent, that man earned his name. He didn't talk much, but his hands did plenty. If he stepped into a fight, he wasn't leaving until it was settled. And once he did speak, people around him stopped what they were doing. That type of quiet weight doesn't come easy. You have to earn it. Now, the rise of Armenian Power didn't happen in a vacuum either. In the late 80s, the streets of LA were shifting. Russian and Eastern European crime groups were on the rise, and Armenian Power had some serious ties to them. That connection opened doors. More resources, more weapons, more moves. With that kind of backing, they weren't just another crew anymore. They started staking out turf, getting organized, moving weight. Then summer of '91 hits, and a group of Armenian Power members just rolls up and straight up claims a mini mall parking lot in East Hollywood like it was theirs. No negotiations, no asking, just taking. Anyone trying to shop, grab a bite, or even just chill? Nah, not without feeling that pressure. It got so tense that shop owners had to hire 2 off-duty LAPD officers just to keep things from blowing up. This wasn't just some kids acting out. This was the beginning of something way more structured. Most of these guys were still in their teens or early 20s, fresh out of East Hollywood or Glendale. And if you know Glendale, you know it's deep with Armenian families. We're talking almost 1 in 4 people there being Armenian, the biggest concentration in the whole US. Now, sure, SoCal's got over 300,000 Armenian Americans, so this wasn't some massive epidemic or anything, but still, when your grandparents ran from genocide and war just to see their grandkids caught up in gangs, that hits differently. It felt like a gut punch to everything they worked so hard to build: politics, business, farming, even the arts. For newer immigrants from places like Beirut, Iran, or Armenia itself, seeing a gang like this pop up felt like the past chasing them down again. They came to the US to leave that lawless, wild energy behind, but now it was creeping back in, right in their neighborhoods. Now, if you asked AP members why they did what they did, most wouldn't call it crime. They saw themselves like the old school Irish or Italian gangs, holding it down for their own, standing up against being picked on or disrespected by bigger sets. They felt like protectors. But let's be real, they weren't just running community watch. These dudes were deep into scams. One of their biggest hustles? Bank fraud. They ran a scheme where they'd act like elderly customers, have new checks sent out, and then scoop them straight from mailboxes. From there, it was a whole operation of forgery and fast money. Then they got into the weed game heavy. Hundreds of pounds moving through a local body shop. with some members even growing their plants in the crib. Landlords who tried to speak up got hit with threats or extortion, and if you were really unlucky, you might get snatched, beat down, or worse. They even stepped into the gambling world, hosting secret tournaments in the valley. Cops later found poker tables branded with the AP logo and an Armenian crest, like they were running their own little Vegas out in the cut. As the crew got older, they didn't fade away. Their kids and younger homies came up more advanced. These young heads were tech savvy, talking identity theft, credit card fraud, internet scams. They'd run rings around police, homeland connections, multiple languages, and a level of sneakiness that made them ghosts. One of their slickest moves was at 99-cent only stores. Armenian Power members would distract cashiers, slap skimmers onto registers, and dip. Weeks later, they swing back, grab the devices, and use that data to clone cards. Authorities say they stole $2 million just from that scam alone, and most of the victims weren't rich people. These were people already struggling. Unlike traditional gangs always beefing over turf, AP had a bigger vision. They linked back up with the Mexican Mafia inside the prison system. The Mafia gave them protection and clout, and Armenian Power repaid that with muscle, handling collections and dirty work. That bond was so real that AP even added the number 13 to their name as a sign of loyalty. From 1992 to 1993, Peter Sana Ojeda, a major shot caller in the Mexican Mafia, started pulling the strings in Orange County. He kicked off these underground meetings at El Salvador Park, right in the heart of Santa Ana. Word got around quick, and soon the LA sets of the Mexican Mafia wanted in. So the meetings grew, and now you got a bunch of rival gang members from all over Los Angeles posted up in one place, trying not to kill each other. To keep it from going left, they laid down the law: no liquor, no dope, and no straps. But you already know how street politics go. It ain't always clean. Even though Armenian Power wasn't Latino, they rolled with the Serenos, so they got a seat at the table. At one of those sit-downs in a park in LA, an AP-13 dude showed up lit. He's dressed like your typical cholo. Crease so sharp you could get cut, khaki sagging, and a big old pistol stuffed in the waistband. Now that was strike three. Ernest Chuco Castro wasn't tolerating it. He stepped to the AP dude and checked him on the spot. When homie got mouthy, Chuco didn't waste a breath, slapped him and snatched the gun out his pants like he was taking candy from a kid. Turns out that gun wasn't just any heat. Later on, during a Fed raid, they found it was a Mac 11 submachine gun, fully loaded and ready to spray. That set the tone. These meetings weren't just business, they were battlegrounds for respect. Then came March of '97. Nishan Kazanchian, just a regular Armenian dude, wasn't even banging. He was dropping off a Latina girl around 2:25 in the morning. But someone was watching, an MS-13 member who clearly wasn't feeling the intermix. The second Nishan pulled into her driveway, 4 shots ended his life. Cops believed the shooter thought he was AP, because sometimes your face, your name, your roots, they're enough to sign your death certificate. But this wasn't random. A week before, Armenian Power had hit one of theirs, literally ran over a Salvadoran gang member outside an ice cream spot on Western Avenue. Retaliation came fast and cold. When they buried Nishan, Forest Lawn Cemetery was packed. Hundreds of Armenian families showed up. Inside that little chapel, there was crying, but it wasn't loud sobs. It was this deep, hurting hum, mothers wailing like the grief was clawing at their lungs. Outside, the men stood around in silence. No tears, no talking, just pain in their eyes. Except for one man, Sharky Clean, a 235-pound ex-bounty hunter, bail bondsman, and martial arts master. He had trained Nishan since he was 6. He never meant to raise soldiers, but in that crowd, many of the boys he taught had turned into foot soldiers for the gang. And now, that cycle was alive and spinning. Then came May. Krikor Yogi was sitting at a red light in North Hollywood. The car next to him flashed V and B, signs for the Violent Boys, a big Latino set. Yogi threw up his AP sign in return. One breath later, he was gone, shot right there in the driver's seat. By the end of '97, law enforcement had clocked Armenian Power in at least 12 drive-bys. Some of the old heads in the community started speaking up, saying this gang had stained their people's name, but inside, Petrosian didn't feel any shame. He straight up said that when other people's kids were in trouble, getting bullied at school or jumped in the streets, they called AP, and AP showed up. But Armenian Power wasn't just some random hood gang. Nah, they had layers. On the yard, they rocked with the Mexican Mafia. In the streets, they tied in with older Armenian organized crime outfits. And in the underworld, they linked with Italians and Russians. They ran their game heavy out in Glendale, Burbank, and Hollywood. That was their playground, but they didn't just flex outside the culture. A lot of the time, they hit their own. Armenian businesses, Armenian families, they were targets too. And they weren't shy about getting political either, backing radical groups like JCAG, just like how the Aryan Brotherhood supported Sinn Féin. One of the wildest ties came from this dude, Gerald Bouncer Fernandez. Used to roll with Emi. He flat out said his whole crew was Armenian. He even claimed his stepdad was Armenian too. According to him, most of his boys had connections with serious organized crime players. So while the younger ones out here might have looked like your regular street gang, tatted up, repping colors, claiming blocks, there was way more going on behind the scenes. A whole criminal network was in motion. Those young shooters, just muscle. The real power, sitting in silence, running the game from boardrooms and backrooms. By the early 2000s, beef between Armenian Power and Latino gangs in Los Angeles wasn't just some neighborhood tension. It was war. Territory, respect, pride, it all clashed in the streets. And when AP started pushing deeper into areas already claimed by long-standing Latino sets, bodies started dropping. It was Cinco de Mayo, 2000, May 5th, and Raul Aguirre was just doing what he always did. 17 years old, no gang ties, no street rep. Kid was just trying to graduate from Hoover High and help his family out. He held down a job at Taco Bell after school, stayed out of the way, and had plans to join the Marines. That afternoon around 3:45, Raul was waiting for the bus outside the school when two Armenian American teens pulled up. They flashed gang signs at a nearby Latino student. Someone Raul kind of knew. It popped off quick. The Armenian boys jumped out and started swinging. Raul, wearing his Mexican soccer jersey, in honor of the day, stepped in to break it up. He wasn't trying to fight, just trying to do the right thing. But things turned left fast. The fight spilled across the street, right in front of Toll Middle School. One of the Armenian teens, just 15, ran back to the car and grabbed a tire iron, swung it into Raul's face like he was nothing. Then the older teen pulled a knife and stabbed Raul 4 times right there on the sidewalk, with a crowd of kids watching. Raul collapsed. 2 hours later, he died in the hospital. None of the suspects even knew Raul. They weren't targeting him. Prosecutors later said it was straight up premeditated. Those boys came ready to kill. All 3, Karen Tertarian, Rafael Gevorgian, and Anait Masrayan, got picked up and charged with first-degree murder. And then came the retaliation. About a week later, a car with Latino gang members rolled into a donut shop parking lot where some Armenian American teens were chilling. Words got tossed, then bullets. One Armenian kid, Aram Gulian, caught a round in the leg. The shooter sped off and nobody got arrested. 3 weeks later, it escalated again, but this time, it hit close to Armenian Power's core. Armin Petrosian had a rough past, robberies, PCP charges, time behind bars. But by 2000, he was ready to leave all that behind. No more street life, just quiet days in North Hollywood, trying to keep things simple. On the day it happened, he slept in late, hung with his older brother, then decided to go grab some food at a familiar spot, Soren's Deli in Hollywood. But earlier that day, on Sunset and Western, a random AP member had flashed their set and pointed a pistol at 3 White Fence members. Now, White Fence was one of LA's oldest Latino street gangs. These dudes weren't new to beef, and they took that as a straight-up disrespect. So they spun the block with a plan. Petrosian was just sitting outside the deli when a member of White Fence walked up and shot him twice. One of those shots went straight through his heart. He died right there at his favorite spot, just trying to eat. LAPD locked up Jose Argueta not long after. The car he fled in crashed and gave him up. Police first thought this might have been retaliation for Raul Aguirre's death, but that didn't stick. Petrosian's killing was tied to the disrespect earlier that day, not the high school stabbing weeks before. Argueta, only 17, tried to deny pulling the trigger, claimed he gave the job to someone else, a ghost named Sapo, but the evidence was tight. Cops had gunpowder on his hands, matched bullets, and a taped confession where he detailed how to do a walk-up hit, telling Sapo to aim with his palm down, real gang style. No one ever found Sapo. In court, Argueta slouched in his chair, barely moving. The back of his head showed off the White Fence initials tattooed into his scalp, and he listened to a translator through headphones. His lawyer didn't call a single witness. The jury didn't take long, guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The sentence? 50 years to life, no chance of parole. Then came a plot by the Armenian Power gang so outrageous, it felt like it was ripped straight from a Hollywood script. It all kicked off early morning on July 29, 2009. Sandro Carmryan, a real estate dude from Sherman Oaks, pulled into the underground garage of a Van Nuys apartment. But before he could even step out, Vagan Ajemian and Surin Garibian rolled up and snatched him. Just like that, broad daylight or not, he was gone. For 5 days, they moved him across random safe spots around the Southland, tied up, blindfolded, and bleeding. While they had him stashed, they forced him to make desperate calls to friends and family, some here in Cali, some overseas in Russia, begging for $1 million ransom. Meanwhile, Ajemian was draining his bank account using Sandro's ATM card like it was his own. Gibson, one of their boys, was holding Sandro hostage out in Mira Loma, posted up with 3 pit bulls like he was guarding a vault. At some point, Sandro took a bullet, right in the backside. It tore through him and ripped upward, leaving his insides a mess. By the time the LAPD finally pulled off the rescue, the guy was barely hanging on. But even with all that, Ajemian, he didn't flinch, not a hint of emotion. Then came the courtroom drama. His lawyer tried to flip the whole thing, claiming it was self-defense, said Ajemian genuinely believed the Russian Mafia was after him, and kidnapping Sandro, that was just him trying to stay alive. The prosecutor wasn't having it, called it nonsense, said there was no evidence, no threat, no hit, just 3 men who plotted a kidnapping and executed it with zero mercy. Even in court, through a translator, Ajemian tried to spin it like he had no choice. He swore up and down that if he hadn't taken Sandro, he'd be dead himself. The judge wasn't buying any of it. Gibson got 27 years. Garibian, who took a plea deal, got 17, but Ajemian, he got slammed with the worst, 30 years. The judge said he masterminded the whole thing. The stalking, the kidnapping, the ransom, every piece of it. Now fast forward to April 3rd, 2010. Nurses Arthur Galstian showed up at a memorial at the Hotspot Cafe. It was a somber night, a gathering to honor Artum Tachian, who had died in a brutal car crash. About a dozen people remained as things wound down, but something sparked. Galstian got into a heated argument with some familiar faces. Nobody knows what was said, but whatever it was, it lit a fuse. He stepped out, hit his car, and came back strapped, with a loaded pistol and an extra clip. 8 minutes was all it took. When he walked back in, he unleashed hell. 50 rounds rang out in that banquet room. By the time the smoke cleared, 4 men were dead. Harut, Sarkis K, Varden, and Hake. 2 more, David and Nishan, were badly wounded. One of the men had been shot 10 times, chest and back of the head, cold-blooded execution. Surveillance caught Galstian fleeing. LAPD and U.S. Marshals tracked him and his brother Samuel all the way up to a quiet house near Seattle, one that had already been on federal watch. The brothers were grabbed not long after. In court, their lawyer tried to flip the script again, claimed it was all self-defense, said 2 of the victims were strapped and had come to intimidate the Galstians, tried to paint nurses as scared, not savage. The lawyer even said some of the victims had criminal records, fraud, gun charges, ties to organized crime. Cops didn't buy it. They said nurses had been bullied, pushed around, and forced to do dirty work by some of the same men. Eventually, the anger hit a boil and he snapped. But prosecutors couldn't tie Samuel to the actual shooting, so they let him go for lack of solid evidence. Still, nurses wasn't out of the fire yet. Just days after the massacre, the feds piled on more charges, selling unlicensed guns and carrying weapons with the serial numbers scratched off. Then came the verdict. The jury, 9 men and 3 women, found him guilty. 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 of second-degree voluntary manslaughter, and aggravated mayhem. Judge Charlene F. Olmedo didn't hold back. She gave him 2 life sentences, back-to-back, with no chance of parole. And then, she stacked 2 more life terms on top of that. Now, to keep Armenian Power from leveling up even more, the feds and local police decided they had to come together and hit them hard. They cooked up this joint crackdown called Operation Power Outage. It wasn't no quick raid either. This thing took years to set up. Undercover agents were out there playing the long game, and phones were tapped all over the place. By the time it all came to a head, over 1,000 agents, ATF, DEA, local PDs, you name it, rolled out heavy and swept up gang members all across California. The operation hit its peak on February 16, 2011. Around 100 AP members got snatched up in one sweep. These weren't just your usual street-level hustlers either. This crew was moving really slick. A lot of their grind was white-collar, like credit card scams and identity theft, the kind of stuff that don't make headlines until it's too late. But don't get it twisted. They still stayed knee-deep in the grimy side too. Their rap sheet read like a full-season crime drama: kidnapping, loan sharking, fraud, extortion, armed robbery, witness intimidation, you name it. They had weed grows running, were sneaking substances into prisons, and kept that gunplay on standby. When authorities dropped the indictments, they threw in the gang's nicknames just to show the public how deep this went. U.S. Attorney Andre Barate Jr. called out names like Capone, Stomper, and Thickneck. Armenian news sites added even more to the roll call: Gator, Horse, The Drink, and Stutter. These weren't just names, they were reputations, stamped in fear and street clout. After that sweep, Armenian Power took a serious hit. Some members vanished, others walked away from the life entirely. A few even packed up and left the country. But even with all that pressure, not everyone lets go. One of them was Meher Darbinian. Now, Meher Darbinian, better known on the streets as Capone or sometimes Hollywood Mike, wasn't just some random player. He was one of the key guys who helped take Armenian Power from a local crew to a serious operation. He's actually the reason they even got tight with the Mexican Mafia. But Darbinian didn't stop at making big connections. By November 2014, he was facing 57 criminal charges. And we're not talking petty stuff. Court records showed everything from extortion and gun charges to fraud and identity theft. He wasn't just part of the game, he was running it. One of his biggest plays was a high-level bank fraud hustle. He set up this web of runners, people who would take fake checks and move them through accounts tied to elderly customers and small businesses. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were drained from people who never saw it coming. But he wasn't stopping at banks. He got tech savvy too. Dude had skimmers set up inside 99-cents only stores across Southern California. These devices snatched people's debit card numbers and their PINs. It was digital pickpocketing, but on a massive scale. And when he wasn't swiping from banks or card holders, he was strong-arming his community. One case had him threatening an Armenian man and his family with violence, trying to extort him for cash. It didn't matter if you were from the same background. If you had money, you were a target. By the end of his trial, the system hit him with 32 years in prison. The court made it clear he wasn't just a gangbanger, he was an organized crime figure. Fast forward to 2019, and Armenian Power was still making noise. One morning around 8:10 a.m., North Hollywood lit up with gunfire. At a shopping plaza near Royal Fresh Market on Sherman Way, cops got called out for shots fired. A gang had been tagging the side of a building with wild messages, all part of a shakedown scheme. Word is they were demanding money, big money, from the owner. But this wasn't a one-sided play. The owner, who was also Armenian, had already been warned by his crew that something shady was going down. What the gang didn't expect was that this man was strapped. He had 2 guns on him, and when they pulled up, things popped off and the shootout was straight up mayhem. Bullets flew everywhere, cars got lit up, windows shattered, and even buildings across the street took hits. One guy caught a bullet in the shoulder, tried to make a run for it, but collapsed and got picked up by the cops. Witnesses said another dude was limping away, probably hit too, but no one's really sure. The shop owner admitted he had a rifle and an automatic, but when the cops searched the place, those guns were nowhere to be found. The message was loud and clear. Armenian Power wasn't just some street gang with bandanas and tattoos. They were deep in fraud, extortion, and violence, and they weren't afraid to turn on their own. They kept a low profile outside of California, but in the LA streets, their name rang out. They didn't specialize in one hustle. They did it all, running their game like a full-blown crime syndicate. Appreciate you watching. If you liked it, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.